It is The Final Word, Season 17, Episode 1. You're off to Pakistan. We mentioned that off the top, but in terms of what's actually going on the ground there at the moment, just wanted to note that we're not... A few people asked me whether we're doing daily shows for England, Pakistan. We're not, and that's because we're actually explicitly prioritising the Women's World Cup. We weren't able to do the last couple of Women's World Cup daily eps for scheduling clashes with Australian Test cricket, and that just with the way the cookie crumbles, we can't do everything. But we do the best we can. But we thought, you know what, we can do the Women's World Cup, so we will. And that means it's not quite viable with the way our feed works in October to be running that alongside the dailies from Pakistan. So we'll still have heaps of coverage on the weekly shows, and hopefully we'll get some interviews out there as well. And, of course, you'll be there providing us updates, I'm sure, along with a bunch of our other Final Word colleagues who are in situ. But, when the tests start on the 7th of October... It'll be in Multan. I mentioned before the incentive for them being in Multan. England don't mind that whatsoever. Bit trickier for the journos though, isn't it? That's very much
going to be 2.5 weeks on the green teas, I think, rather than on the beers.
I mean, everything's dry country, right? But some parts are dry.
So, exactly. Yeah. Whereas I think Multan is one of the driest of the lot, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of more akin to, like, I guess, Ahmedabad in an Indian context, with Gujarat being a place where you need to get pretty resourceful to get a beer. So that'll be the lot in life for the England team. Josh Hull won't be part of that, so he can have a pint back at home. I'm not sure what the beer is in Leicestershire. What's the...
It'll probably be some kind of ale, I reckon. Some kind of... There must be. That's where Broad and Harry Gurney own their pub, isn't it? Somewhere in Leicestershire. You can pull a pint of whatever that pub is called.
Yeah, he can get in there. So, Josh Hull missing owing to the fact that he picked up a quad strain when he played that test match at the Oval a couple of weeks ago. So the fact that they didn't add to their 16-man squad suggests to me that he was on work experience anyway. Like, he wasn't really going to play.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I might be reading too much into it. I think it also suggests Stokes will probably bowl at some point in the series. I really don't know how England will start in terms of balance of their side, whether they'll go... I sort of assume they'll go 2 frontline spinners, but Pakistan... I don't know, they've been doing some crazy stuff with the home pitches recently, trying to get them as grassy as possible, and they went into a test against Bangladesh a couple of weeks ago without a frontline spinner themselves. So
fuck that, didn't
they? They did.
Because Bangladesh played 3 spinners and took over.
So who knows what's going to happen there. I think that'll be... I'm looking forward to getting out, and I think pretty much, flight lands, and I'm pretty much hotel straight to training and try and work out what's going on, because, it's a very tight series. It's also one where, I don't know, it's within the wider context of what both teams are trying to achieve and stuff. Pakistan kind of need to stop the rot. From an England point of view, it's quite a weird series because they went 2 years ago and it was a huge challenge at that point. It was Australia had just won on the the 15-day test. They won on the 15th day. That was a superb series. England hadn't won in Pakistan for however long. It was their first tour there. Whereas this time it's sort of, I don't know, I think there's an expectation that England will go to Pakistan and win, given the state of Pakistan cricket now, which I still don't think it's going to be an easy tour for England, but I think there is every chance that they'll go there and win the series, just given how much of a mess Pakistan have seemed over the past little while. But it's I suppose it's another staging point on the build up for them towards their 2 huge series coming up, India next summer and Australia the following winter. But I don't think I think they'll have to go in and not take Pakistan lightly, because all the cliches about Pakistan cricket, but if they can get the fast bowlers on the pitch, if you have an attack with Shaheen and Naseem Shah in it, it's not going to be easy, is it?
No, it's not. But I think the point you made before about where they're at right now is like they really are a rabble, even by Pakistan.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like there's because people are used to chaos to some extent in Pakistan cricket. It's like people maybe haven't quite appreciated just how bad it's been. Like Shah Massoud has captained 5 tests and lost all 5, and it's probably not really been his fault. I mean, his record with the bat's not been great over the past period of time, really. But I don't know. It just seems like a complete mess. And the most recent test against Bangladesh, Shaheen and Naseem, their 2 prized fast bowling assets, weren't playing, and neither of them had any discernible injury. It was all to do with sort of workload management or resting or something like that. There were various stories that came out as to why it was, but it doesn't feel right, really, that Pakistan can be going into a test without their 2 best fast bowlers, despite the fact they were both probably fit to play. Yeah,
and look, the decision-making process around that was scrutinised. They're 8th on the World Test Championship table with a percentage of 19, so we talk about how Sri Lanka and, to an extent, Bangladesh and certainly Australia and India have all done what they can do in their own control. Well, not Pakistan. Hate to say it, and we hate to say we predicted it even, but when Dizzy took over as coach, Jason Gillespie, who again been on our show before and have such a high regard for, we were fearful for him that if it didn't go well in the first year, if they lose to England at home, that could be it very quickly. I certainly hope they turn it around, that he doesn't suffer that fate, but unfortunately it feels like that degree of volatility at the moment, especially without having Babar Azam making runs full stop. He's had a real decline in the last 18 months or thereabouts. They lost Mohammed Yusuf from their selection committee this week, which, I mean, one report said they've only got 5 voting members left. How many? Only got 5 vote. What that suggests there's ex officio members as well, and non-voting members. How many selectors does it take to pick a Pakistani?
How big are the boardrooms in the hotels and wherever this is being picked? Is it the Gaddafi in Lahore? That's where they're based, isn't it? So there must be some huge boardroom there that fits every selector in, standing room only at the back.
Yeah, so no more Mohammed Yusuf from that team. They've selected a 15-man squad for the first test as well. Always a good sign when you're picking 15 players for one match. Shani's captain, so at least there's that. There's some degree of stability around the captain. Our man, Amir Jamal, is back. We loved Amir Jamal last year in Australia, and the way that he took to Test cricket with such enthusiasm. With bat and ball, had a back problem. And Karim Shahzad, who did perform well against Bangladesh, is out, unfortunately, with a side issue. Noman Ali is back, a guy who, who cops a bit of shit, gets smacked a lot of the time, but has been a big wicket taker occasionally as well. So he'll be partnering with Abra Ahmed as the 2 spinners for Pakistan when that series begins on Monday.
Yeah, incredibly soon.
Hell, there you go. Just going back to the England side of the ledger for a moment here, Ben Stokes suggesting during the week that when England start preparing for their Champions Trophy campaign in Pakistan for March, that unsurprisingly he will be available to play. He said, well, what he actually said was if Brendan McCullum asks him to come out of retirement, he'll do it. So he's now retired twice from one-day cricket and possibly going to make a second comeback ahead of a second major tournament in the space of about a year or whatever it'll work out to be. It's very on brand for Stokes, reinforces the relationship with McCullum, I guess, but what did you think when you saw that come through, especially when you consider there's such an emphasis with the messaging that they're talking about regeneration and the next generation, whether they would not go back to someone who is out of cycle or anything. Stokes is still the Test captain, but someone who's kind of the previous generation, at least in a white ball context.
Yeah, I mean, the mood music has been pretty similar on this for a while, really. I think when they announced the squads to play Australia, they made a big point of specifying that Joe Root was rested, whereas some other players have been left out. So Bairstow and Moeen, for example, have been left out. Moeen's obviously since retired. But Root was very much, he's resting. He's going to be part of our ODI plans. Luke Wright said at a press conference that him and Stokes were both, why wouldn't we pick them? They're both in the mix still for the Champions Trophy, and this sort of seems to confirm it. On paper, it looks like quite a promising England side for that Champions Trophy, but then it looked like quite a good team on paper when they headed to the World Cup this time a year ago, and we know how that went. But yeah, I don't know. There's been a lot of talk about divergence between formats in English cricket over the past 5 years, and now the word is convergence because everything's getting a bit closer together. It probably makes sense given the way that the Test team is playing, that you would have players who are then able to play 50-over cricket and transfer those skills. Someone like Harry Brook is obviously going to be an all-format gun. He's sort of, I think, finally getting there in 50-over cricket, adjusting to the tempo. He's not played a lot of it. But yeah, I'd love to see what they do for that Champions Trophy. I think Root is an interesting one as well. I think he averages sub-30 in ODIs since 2019 World Cup. He's not scored 100 since that World Cup in ODIs.
Wow.
Which is 5 years, and you suddenly think, shit, that's a long time. For one of the probably, if you ask people who the best ODI number 3 is in the world, a lot of people would probably tell you Joe Root's in the conversation at least still. So yeah, I think he'll go, and I think he'll probably be quite successful, but there's probably a conversation to be had there at some stage. And yeah, it looks like Root, Stokes, Butler will all come back in, and then there's obviously going to be competition between, let's say, Salt and Jacks for a spot, maybe Livingston, Bethel. But then there's a tour to the Caribbean in November, and I think a lot of those questions will sort of answer themselves because it'll be mainly fringe players. It won't be any of the Test players, I doubt. And yeah, those guys will almost have shootouts going through the series. Salt v Jacks will probably be opening together, and then we'll be playing off of maybe one opening spot if Root comes back in at 3,
right?
Alongside Duckett, who won't be involved on that tour. So I think it's one of those things where we're far enough away and there's enough cricket for them still to play that they'll have some idea in mind as to what way they're going to go for the Champions Trophy, but there's still time for it all to work itself out.
Yeah, that was the corresponding trip last year where Phil Salt made himself undroppable, wasn't it? Just before Christmas. It's the third year in a row they're going to the Caribbean for a limited overs trip. The annual Cam Ponsonby journey around the Caribbean islands, so he'll be there reporting it all for us on The Final Word. The only other thing from England's perspective is that it's still not entirely clear what the go is with Mark Wood's elbow, whether it needs surgery or not. There's chat that, whether it's a stress fracture, and if it is, it will, and do they get him back in time for the Champions Trophy? I think we're at the stage with Wood where it's like he might have like one or two more like preparations. If you're a horse, they build you up for a campaign, right? Then you're spelled. It feels like Wood might be. They get him up for the Champions Trophy in an absolute best case scenario, and maybe they get him up for the Ashes. Yeah. They don't bother trying to get him up for anything else. And at the end of that, if he's still fit, okay, maybe he pinch hits, but they're the next two things that they need to get him right for somehow.
If I was in charge, I think I would not even be thinking about the Champions Trophy with Wood. I think they will. I think it will be in their thoughts. But given how he's gone in the last two World Cups, the T20 and ODI, he didn't have a particularly good series in either of those. I would be tempted to say, actually, we're going to give some other guys this opportunity in the Champions Trophy. So there's we've seen some fast bowling depth from England between Atkinson, Carrs, Potts, Archer. Reece Topley was ill for most of that series, just gone. Maybe none of them have the pace of Wood, but they have skills that he probably doesn't have. I would be looking at India and Australia and thinking if between those two series, 5 tests at home and then 5 tests in Australia, if they can get him for 5 or 6 of those tests combined, preferably 3 and 3, that would be absolutely fantastic result, I think, at this stage of Wood's career and given his injury history. I'd love him to do even more from his perspective. I think that would be awesome, but I think that would probably be a good outcome if he got 6 across those 10.
The last thing on our international cricket agenda, which I realise now has been a very, very busy one before we come back and finish with some domestic stuff in England and Australia. The Women's World Cup, we mentioned it a couple of times. It begins on Thursday. Warm-up games. Phoebe Litchfield's been out for Australia with a groin issue. That's quite important. She's kind of become, well, it feels to me anyway, like she feels like the kind of player who would be the match winner now. Increasingly that she's got such prodigious talent and got all the shots and got the full game going for her. I did see a report overnight, though, that she might be fully fit for their first game. So watch this space there. Grace Harris has also got what's been described as a new niggle by CA. This is kind of the benefit in some respects of being a very, very strong international team that has very little media coverage day to day on the beat, because you don't have to tell anyone. Right? You get away with saying, I've got a niggle. Don't have to say anything. Who's going to hold you to account?
Yeah.
There'll be anyway. That's the way these things go. I wish we could be there to provide that kind of rigorous coverage, but that's not going to be the case. We still will be there, as I mentioned before, with Norcross and Ponsonby. Harmanpreet saying that this is India's best chance to win a T20 World Cup. Suppose she's right. I mean, that generation that she's had playing under her for so long now, that she's been the skipper, going all the way back to when Madali got the captaincy after the 2019 World Cup, I think it was. They won't get many more bites of the cherry under Harman, and playing in conditions in the UAE which should, in theory, at least suit. And I think on paper, at least, they have got a tricky group, but it feels like in Group A, Australia and India are comfortably the strongest teams. Then New Zealand, who've been dreadful in World Cups of late. Pakistan, who, look, they've enjoyed some success in the warm-up games, but would be the 4 seed. And the wild card in Group A is Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka have won all of these bilateral series in the last 12 months. They've lost some shockers too, but on their day have been good enough to beat more fancied opponents. So Australia, India will be the 1 and 2. But, there is the chance for one of New Zealand on a really good day, improbable as it is, or Sri Lanka to upset the apple cart there.
Yeah, I think the thing that probably has been spoken about a little bit, but if you think back to this time 3 years ago when we had the men's T20 World Cup in the UAE, the toss was such a massive factor in that tournament, and this time of year it feels, particularly towards the back end of that tournament, it could be that a toss is crucial. So if Sri Lanka play India, put them in, get a couple of early polls, then suddenly it's a possibility. The same against Australia, they probably won't beat either of those teams, but under lights is a very different game in the UAE where you were chasing.
This is roughly the same time of year as the World Cup from...
Pretty much spot on, yeah. And I was in a press conference with Heather Knight and John Lewis a couple of weeks ago when they were talking about this, and were saying that there's actually been so little women's international cricket played recently in the UAE that they're kind of guessing and kind of going to have to adjust on their feet, because you can obviously extrapolate to some extent from what's happened in the men's game, but women's cricket is pretty different in several regards. So they're saying that the key is going to be adaptability for them. But you can have hugely different conditions between Dubai, which is a massive ground, which generally has a bit more life in the pitch for the seamers, particularly up front, versus Sharjah, which is pretty small and is generally pretty dry, pretty slow and low. So there could be a huge difference between a day game in Sharjah and a night game in Dubai. That's two completely different things. So the draw is actually probably a pretty relevant factor in all of this.
Looking forward to seeing, as it was in that World Cup, hitting dingers up onto that roof at Sharjah, just hearing the ball kicking off the roof.
As the call to prayer comes down on a Friday.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. The one thing going, I think, for India here in all of this is they play New Zealand first up. So if in the improbable event they drop that early game, they'll know exactly what they need to do. Often it's the team playing the 3 seed in these groups that becomes like a quasi quarterfinal, and daft as that is to say for the tournament opener in that group anyway, that may well be. The comp begins in Sharjah between Scotland and Bangladesh, because Bangladesh are the host. That's in Pool B: Bangladesh, England, Scotland, South Africa, and the Windies. So, I think I might have mentioned this last week. The wild card in that group is the Windies, because Hayley Matthews is winning games on her own, or they're getting pumped. And Scotland, that is, beat the Windies in a warm up game last week. They also beat Pakistan in a warm up game.
Scotland could be really good. I don't know. They beat quite a good island team, to get to this World Cup.
And then they got bowled out for 58 by Sri Lanka in their other warm up games. So draw your own conclusions there. Australia played England in a warm up game. They're in different groups. Mooney and Capsey made runs and McGrath took wickets, but I assure you these warm-up games made absolutely nothing. One of these feature in the Maxi book, which will be an amusing passage to read when the time's there.
One of the crazy things about this World Cup as well is because it's so last minute, the change in venue, the ICC have basically block booked an entire hotel for all the teams to stay in. So I saw some quotes from, I think Kim Garth was talking about it the other day. We're saying, I think each team basically has a floor in this hotel. So that she was saying it's going to be quite an intense tournament, sort of COVID style, where if you go down at breakfast having just dropped a game the night before, or had a bit of a stush with someone, then suddenly they're there, getting their omelette from the buffet.
Wow,
it's going to be it must be quite an intense, almost athletes village style stuff.
I was just thinking exactly the same thing. Right, so that's international cricket done and dusted, and so is the beautiful old county championship. I don't intend on spending all day talking about it today, A, because we've spoken a lot already, and B, because the main bits and bobs have been resolved in the penultimate round, that being Surrey, with Rory Burns holding up the trophy for the 4th time since 2018. 3 on the trot, first time a team has three-peated since the 1960s with Yorkshire, and he's the second most successful Surrey captain since Stuart Surridge. So you get a sense of the Surrey achievement there. Their game against Essex was a total non-event. Surrey made 508 for 8. Essex made 508 for 8. Then against Surrey, who fielded a seconds team mostly and gave some kids a go, they made 267 for 7. Dean Elgar made another 100 to finish with 1,100 runs for the season for Essex. Century for Wesley, the captain. Another one for Critches, a good year for our guy at Essex. And Dom Sibley made a century for Surrey. But yes, a lot of players were out on the ground for the celebrations, heavy. But when it's all said and done, once you've got the job done, you don't need to worry about what happens in round 14.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a pretty bleak week in terms of the weather as well. There were various points in the week where I think maybe at most 2 games were going on simultaneously out of the 8 or 9. So pretty one of those where sometimes you get an Indian summer here in the UK and it's lovely at the end of September, and sometimes it's like it currently is, raining, a bit miserable, and people are thinking it's not too much to play for here, is there? I think that was the game where Sam Cooke was bowling offies, wasn't it?
Yes, that kind of summed up that game down at Chelmsford. Just to cherry pick a few bits and pieces here, Durham and Kent had a high scoring draw. David Bettingham led Division 1, 1,331 runs at 78. One of 7 players in Division 1 who got to 1,000 runs, for what it's worth, for those that pay attention to those things. Sam Hain made a century unbeaten for Warwickshire, which is significant. He's had a tough year, Sam, which has been discussed, and it had a slow start to the year, sitting out for a while, taking some time away from cricket. But a player of such prodigious talent and playing for England as recently as 12 months ago, hopefully that gets him flying again in 2025. Somerset, and that was in the Notts Warwickshire draw, by the way, which confirmed that Lancs were going down.
Yep.
And Somerset managed to finish 3rd in a 2-horse race, which is quite the achievement. They lost to Hampshire by 5 wickets. They were bowled out for 136 and 180 on a spicy track by the looks of things down at Taunton, with Abbott and Dawson cleaning up with the ball in the first innings. Leach kept Somerset in it, taking a fifer. He's had a great month ahead of that Pakistan series. Jack Leach, who hasn't played Test cricket since the start of the year.
Yeah, he's probably right in the mix, I imagine, for that first Test. As you know, it could be him and Bashir. They've hardly ever bowled in tandem for Somerset. I think maybe one or two games, but probably every chance they do it for England in this series.
Yeah, like to see that. And Vincent Dawson with the bat as well. Appropriately, they finished it off. Dawson, by the way, absolutely the player of the year across the country. 54 wickets at 25 and nearly 1,000 runs at 60.
Yeah, pretty good.
This bloke hasn't played Test cricket since 2018's beyond me. And Vince nearly got 1,000 runs as well, at an average of 50, a guy who, we'll probably always think of as someone who, in a different life, in a different universe, could have enjoyed such a successful Test career. But the time that he came in 16 and again in late 17, it just never quite clicked for him.
Yeah, and those guys have spent, 15 years pretty much playing together at Hampshire and doing unbelievably well for the most part. They've been, I don't know how when the time comes in 5 years or whenever it might be, the GMR group are going to go about replacing them. But
the Southern, maybe they'll win a county championship for the Southern Daredevils, the Southern
Capitals.
My apologies, at some stage. The other game that had some emotional weight with it was down at Worcester, who stay up. They drew with Lancs, who go down, which is sad. Lancs, who played the kids a lot this year, but haven't got enough points to stay in Division 1. But Worcester was stuffed early. They were 56 for 7 before they were saved by Matt Waite and Logan Van Beek. And Logan Van Beek was out there on the final day when Joe Leach walked out to Jolene for one last time. Joe Leach, and he made 39 out in a hurry. A stalwart at New Road, played a massive role in getting them back into Division 1, kept them there. We touched on it briefly last week, but what a story that they've been able to finish mid-table from where they were. I know that so much of it is laden with grief, and Josh Baker's parents did an interview with Nick Holt in the Telegraph, which I could barely get through. It's just the worst thing imaginable, and that club were able to keep it together is testament to the fact that they're made of pretty tough stuff over there. Yeah,
worth having a read if you haven't already of that interview with Baker's parents. It's just I think just the age, for someone to be taken by a pretty freak illness at that age is pretty difficult to get your head around, isn't it? Unfathomable, really, what they've gone through over that period. But clearly, have had the embrace of the club around them. It is a small, it's a small place, it's a small club, and that's probably one of the real benefits of it, is that sort of family connection. They've been, I think, handled it as well as you could hope, really, as a club. Both the playing staff and then the off, all the nice off-field stuff, like they retired a shirt number this week. I think they've made the Baker parents life members, all the sort of nice stuff that has sort of underlines. Bizarre but somehow successful season for them, really.
In Division 2, Yorkshire go up in record-breaking style. Now, noting they had to lose and Middlesex had to win for anything to change in Division 2, but after they rolled Northants for 147 on day one with Ben Code, 4 for, took 56 at 16. Ben Code went under the radar till late in the season, but finishes equal first on wickets with Jamie Porter, and one more than Abbott, and I think more again from Dan Worrell, who was seen as the two best bowlers in Division 1. So maybe he doesn't get the kudos, Ben Code, but we'll get the chance next year in Divi 1 because they batted for, not that long really in context, but they made 726 for 7 declared. They went at better than 5 and over in doing so. James Wharton finished his season with 285 in just 319 balls, a landmark innings for the 23-year-old on the way to Division 1, and left Northants only a few overs to bat. And so it goes. But the second highest score for Yorkshire in first-class cricket, when you consider how long Yorkshire have been playing for and the number of games they've played, and also the highest score ever at Headingley.
Strange way for Otis Gibson to finish. He's again handled himself very well and kept his counsel, but was told in June or July that his contract wasn't going to be renewed. And I think having had the finish to the season that they've had, it's pretty gutting for him. It sounds like Anthony McGrath is the hot favourite to go in there. Who's obviously got a long-term association with the club, having played for them. But Otis has kind of done his job, really. Brought them up. That was the plan all along. But won't get the opportunity to coach them in Div 1, which is a shame, really.
A reminder how important batting and bowling points are, because Yorkshire and Middlesex finished with the same record, 5 wins and 2 losses, but they're 21 points clear. Middlesex, as I say, needed to win. Because of the rain, it was never going to happen down at Sussex. They tried to declare their first innings. A number of people have been talking about this in Journo land the last couple of days, that Middlesex were trying to declare it 0 for 0 to give themselves a chance of setting up the game, but that was knocked on the head. And I don't know why that was knocked on the head, by the way. I mean, anyway, I suppose Sussex, from their perspective, were trying to get in the way of it, because the only way they could not be champions was if they were to lose to Middlesex and Yorkshire were to win. Then they could have theoretically finished second, having already sewn up promotion. But I suppose that's the way these things go. Where Middlesex did bat, they got 271. Sam Robson, a 4th century for his year, averaged 58. So reliable up at Lord's, Sam Robson. And then a ton for Tom Haynes, who will love Division 1 next year for Sussex. And, Middlesex used 9 bowlers, very, last day of school energy. And the last game for Middlesex for Ethan Bamber, who lives just around the corner here behind us in North London. He's off to Warwickshire next season. Good signing.
Yeah, Sussex's season and promotion has kind of been the heart of it. Has been good recruitment, because they managed to pinch John Simpson from Middlesex when he had time left on his contract as well. But with Middlesex's financial position, I think it made sense for them, or so they thought. But yeah, for him to captain them to the title, having not done a lot of captaincy, I don't think. Remarkable signing, really, given the runs he scored as well.
I like at the end of the year we can focus a little bit on personal milestones. Wayne Madsen, in his final innings of the season, made 100 to make sure he just tipped over 1,000 runs. 1,005 runs at 50. You can't be stopped, that bloke. They drew with Leicester, who finished 5th despite only winning 1 game. So that's the next step for them, of course, going from being a team that doesn't lose, and Hanscom did a great job of helping with that with so many runs, but where they can go from here. And Derbyshire sadly finished last despite Madsen's runs. And the same thing happened with Sam North East. So he finished with 1,004 runs at 50, having made 64 not out, as Glamorgan made their way to 381 for Ford, declared a century for Chris Cook, 84 for Colin Ingram, who quietly, via Division 2 at Glamorgan, I say quietly, the most runs in the country, 1,351 runs at 90. Ingram finished on as they're overseas. They did a great thing where they set the game up. They declared, Gloucestershire declared, and then they declared again. So 3 consecutive declarations, 2 of which were at none for none, which in effect meant Gloucester needed to make 382 to win, and they were bowled out for 189. So it didn't happen. So they finished 3rd last and 2nd last respectively, Glamorgan and Gloucestershire. But I like the fact that they had some high moments, both teams, and maybe the moment of the season was their remarkable tie in the festival game at Cheltenham.
Yeah, it's a fair point. Yeah, Ingram is a fascinating one, who about 6 or 7 years ago now was an early days T20 freelancer who looked like his Red Bull career was completely done, and now here he is, pretty much based in Cardiff, I think, these days, churning out Champo runs in Div 2. Good on him.
So that's the county championship as we wind towards a close here, just noting that there were 2 washouts in the one-day domestic comp for the men in Australia over the weekend. There was a game at the Junction Oval on Grand Final Eve, which they've done that 2 years in a row now. That feels like something they can build on a public holiday in Melbourne, Victoria. 240 for 7, and Queensland fell just 5 runs short in the final over. Todd Murphy, by all reports, bowled beautifully with 3 for 38, so that's great news for a guy who had, I suppose you might call it, second album blues last year, having played a fair bit of Test cricket. In 2023, he'll want to be in contention for that Sri Lanka series, which I mentioned earlier, is relevant to what's going on in Shield cricket at the moment. There are a number of headlines around Maxwell playing for Victoria next week. And yes, the Victorians will play their first game without Scott Boland, who has an injury to his knee.
Yeah, a bit of a concern that for Boland, because he had a heel injury, I think, for Durham that kept him out of the whole English summer, more or less. And then, I don't know, is he getting to the point where suddenly someone else might jump ahead of him? Like, I suppose Bartlett himself has got an injury, but someone of that mould might jump ahead in the selection queue. I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, he's nationally contracted, which is great. But my instinct is that, it's just one of those things. Everything needs to go right when a guy's that old, right? And he's just hit that point where things have started to catch up with him. And in the WNCL, there's been 2 games each for everyone bar Victoria who are yet to play yet. So we've seen South Australia, Tasmania and New South Wales all win 2 games. So Queensland beating New South Wales. No, that's wrong. I got that out of order here. But believe me when I say that Queensland beat New South Wales twice, South Australia beat the ACC twice, and Tasmania, the defending champions, beat WA twice in the women's 50-over comp. Jess Jonathan, a statement performance, making 89 after being left out of the World Cup squad. And maybe a statement or two from the England players out there too. Home Winfield Hill, 65, and Georgia Adams, 63 for Queensland and New South Wales, respectively. So either of those players could have ended up in the World Cup squad with Heather Knight, but not to be, and they'll make their living in Australia through the English winter.
Yeah, both gone pretty quick at the end of that domestic season, haven't they? I sort of suddenly click on a scorecard and was like, my God, how have we got here already? But it's the winter. We're here.
How have we got here already? Bloody hell, that might be the busiest show we've ever done in terms of topics covered. I knew you were up for it.
Yeah,
I knew you were up for it.
Collo.
There aren't, not everyone has the breadth of knowledge that you do, Heavy, to do this on the with about a 12 hours notice to step in and do as well as you have. So thank you for coming on and co-hosting today. You've got the PCA dinner tonight.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
It's got to start.
First one, yeah.
The big
Got my black tie out.
Yeah, I was going to say, get your bow tie on and maybe have a big dinner before. Big dinner.
Yeah, we'll see how we
go too hard early on.
Might be my last chance for a couple of weeks, though, with Milltown coming up.
True, but just take care of yourself, plenty of waters and that kind of thing. Thanks again to everyone who supports us. The lots tabs I didn't mention before, but sign up for the marathon, half marathon in Scotland. That's a big part of what we're doing at the moment. Get yourself a NordVPN and book yourself a cruise with Ambassador Cruise Lines. All the info, 10% off in the show notes. Thank you to our patrons who make it all possible. Jeff will be back with me for Storytime 203 on Sunday. All right, deep breath. We're all done. Season 17, Episode 1, finished. Goodbye.